I hear Christians all the time talk about trying to discern what God's will is for their life, especially if they're thinking about big decisions like a career change, relationship change, or something like buying a house. But what that process of seeking God looks like has just always been kind of vague. Unless you see a burning bush, it frequently seems to boil down to, I thought about it a bunch and I couldn't think of a reason not to. So it kind of blew my mind when I was reading Spiritual Exercises by Ignatius of Loyola, and he just laid out, this is how you should make a decision as a Christian. It wasn't until I read that I realized how weird it was that it's something that Christians do all the time. Like, when we're obviously constantly making decisions, but at least in the Christian circles that I've lived my life in, I've never had someone thoughtfully and practically outline a process to walk through when there isn't a burning bush. So I wanted to share that with you. Then I've also included a couple bonus questions from Ignatius that you can ask yourself that I found really helpful. So 2 things before we even get started. First, Ignatius says, set aside intentional space. And along those same lines, not stepping into it when you are emotionally worked up. And he says, do it in a time of tranquility. Second, don't expect the process to be quick. When Jeremiah was asked by the people of Jerusalem whether they should flee from the Babylonians, he prayed for 7 days before he got an answer. Like, that is not easy circumstances. I feel like if he can wait 7 days, I can probably exercise a little bit more patience as I'm seeking God's will. So now the 6 steps. Step 1 is straightforward. Just bring to mind the decision that you have questions about. Step 2 is where a profound shift happens from the way that our world says make decisions. So I'm going to take a step back and say, for context, to be a Christian is to say Jesus is the one true king. And as long as we live in rebellion and live lives as if we ourselves are on the throne, we will live lives of death and decay that don't reach the fullness that we long for. That is what it means to be a Christian. So in step 2, Ignatius draws our attention to what should have been wildly obvious to me about making decisions, but still blew my mind. The only variable that should have any weight in this decision, whatever the decision is what God's will would be. How does it advance the kingdom of light and bring me closer to him and him more glory? We need to consciously set aside every other desire as we step into decision making. How much money I would make, what other people would think about it, how hard it would be, and what I might be risking. And God's will might be for me to make money. It might be for me to avoid risks. Who knows what God's will be in those things, but that is secondary. All of that stuff is negligible compared to how can I bring God glory through this decision. I worry that I'm going to lose people here because we don't talk enough about the whole life devotion that Jesus calls us to. You might think that sounds a little extreme, but belief in Jesus is a truth claim, and it is extreme. Either he is the God of the universe or he isn't. Either he is walking alongside you or he isn't. And the difference between those 2 realities is and should be extreme. Step 3 is to ask God to move my will and bring to mind what I ought to do. He actually says, beg God. Sometimes what we call prayer is just feeling things in God's general direction. I'm not saying that we always need words, but I think sometimes the problem isn't that we lack the words, it's that we lack the intentionality. Ask God for his guidance. Step 4 is to make a pros and cons list, which just feels so modern, but with a wildly different lens, because here we are weighing the advantages and benefits only as they relate to the glory of God and the health of your soul. Again, this puts into practice and perspective the reality that Jesus is our King. Nothing else makes the pros and cons list. 5th, after you've reflected, consider which alternative seems more reasonable. And Ignatius says, check your motives. Be sure it's not some other desire that has you thinking this way. And finally, step 6 is offering your choice to God, that he may accept and affirm it if it's the right choice. I love that this starts and ends with God. Again, it just seems so obvious, and yet I've never heard anyone talk about it like this. If you like this kind of a video, I can't promise that I'm ever going to make a video like this again, but you should stick around anyway. Ignatius also has a couple extra questions you can ask yourself, and this is where I really feel like self-help books are ripping off Ignatius. Question number 1. If a stranger were in the same situation and asked you which decision you thought would please God more, what would you say? Now, question number 2, think about the moment of your death. Which decision will you wish then that you had made now? And question number 3, imagine yourself standing before the judge on the last day. When you are there, what decision will you wish you had made now? So that's it. The most practical and tangible way to walk through decision making as a Christian that I have ever heard. What about you? What advice have you heard on how to make a decision as a Christian? Am I the only one who somehow missed this day in Sunday school, or is this just as big a gap as it feels? And of course, like and subscribe. I'd love to see more of you.